For 6 days, the sky over North Africa turned black with smoke. The greatest city in the western Mediterranean, a metropolis of perhaps 500,000 people, was burning to the ground, street by street. And on a hill above the inferno, the Roman general who had given the order to destroy it did something nobody expected. He wept. His name was Scipio Aemilianus, and beside him stood a Greek historian called Polybius, who wrote down what happened next. Scipio looked at the dying city and quoted a line of Homer about the fall of Troy. "A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish." Polybius asked him why a victorious commander would weep at the very moment of his greatest triumph. And Scipio answered that he was not thinking of Carthage at all. He was thinking of Rome, because he understood that every empire that has ever risen has also fallen, and that one day someone would stand over the ashes of Rome the way he now stood over the ashes of Carthage. This is the story of that vanished city, a civilization that ruled the seas for 600 years, that produced the single greatest general the ancient world ever feared, that came within a hair's breadth of destroying Rome itself, and was then wiped so completely from the face of the earth that for centuries we knew it almost entirely through the words of the people who killed it. How does an empire that size simply disappear? How did a nation of traders and sailors come so close to bringing Rome to its knees? Why did Rome decide that defeating Carthage was not enough, that it had to be unmade, its walls pulled down, its harbor filled in, its very name turned into a curse? And what did the world lose when the libraries of Carthage went up in flames? Welcome back. I use modern AI reconstruction and the best historical sources to bring the lost world back to life as faithfully as we can imagine it. So let us begin not with the ending, but with the beginning, on a coast 1,000 miles to the east. To find Carthage, we first have to find the Phoenicians. On a narrow ribbon of land at the eastern edge of the Mediterranean, in what is now Lebanon, a people built a string of trading cities: Tyre, Sidon, Byblos. They had no great army, no vast farmland, almost no empire in the way we usually mean the word. What they had was the sea. The Phoenicians were the finest sailors of the ancient world. They sailed where no one else dared, trading cedar and glass and a rare purple dye, squeezed drop by drop from sea snails, so precious that it would one day become the color of kings. They also gave us something we still use every single day: the alphabet. Nearly every letter you are reading these words with descends from marks first made by Phoenician traders keeping their accounts. And around the year 814 before Christ, according to legend, one of these traders changed history. Her name was Elissa, though the Romans would later call her Dido. She was a princess of Tyre, and when her brother, the king, murdered her husband to seize his wealth, she fled across the sea with a band of loyal followers. She landed on the coast of North Africa and asked the local people for land. They offered her only as much ground as could be covered by a single ox hide. So Elissa cut the hide into the thinnest strips she could, tied them end to end, and encircled an entire hill. It was the first sign of the cleverness that would define her city. They called it Carthage, the new city. In time, that name softened on Roman tongues into the word we know: Carthage. From that hill, Carthage grew into something the world had never seen. Not an empire of conquered land, but an empire of trade routes. Carthaginian ships threaded the whole western Mediterranean, carrying silver from Spain, tin from distant Britain, gold and ivory from deep inside Africa. One Carthaginian admiral, Hanno, is said to have sailed a fleet out through the Pillars of Hercules and down the Atlantic coast of Africa, further than any European would travel again for nearly 2,000 years. At the heart of the city lay its masterpiece, the harbour. A vast rectangular commercial dock opened into a hidden circular war harbour called the Cathon, ringed with covered ship sheds that could shelter and repair as many as 220 warships at once. From the street, you could not even see the fleet. To Carthage's rivals, it was as if her navy could appear from nowhere. This was a city that lived and breathed and grew rich on the water. Imagine walking through Carthage at its height, a city of towering apartment blocks, some 6 stories high, packed onto the slopes above the sea. Markets loud with a dozen languages, workshops turning out pottery, jewelry, weapons, and the famous purple cloth. Temples crowning the great central hill of Byrsa. Suburbs of grand villas with gardens and running water. By some estimates, it was among the largest and wealthiest cities on earth, rivaling anything in the Greek or Roman world. This was not a nation of barbarians on the edge of civilization. In many ways, Carthage was the more sophisticated of the 2 great powers, and it is precisely that sophistication that makes its total erasure so haunting. Carthage was not even ruled by a king. It was a republic, governed by elected officials called suffets and a powerful council of elders. Its constitution was so admired that the Greek philosopher Aristotle studied it as a model of balanced government, praising it in the same breath as Sparta and his own Athens. Remember that the next time you hear Carthage described as a savage enemy. But every civilization has a darker side. And here we have to be careful, because almost everything we know about Carthage was written by its enemies. The Carthaginians worshipped gods named Baal, Hamun, and Tanit, and Greek and Roman writers accused them of a terrible practice, the sacrifice of their own children, burned as offerings in times of crisis. Archaeologists have found the Tophet, a sacred precinct filled with the urns of cremated infants. Some scholars believe this is proof the accusations were true. Others argue these were simply burials of children who died young, and that Rome exaggerated the horror to paint its enemy as monstrous. We may never know for certain, and that uncertainty is the whole tragedy of Carthage. We are forced to see it through the eyes of the people who wanted it destroyed. For a long time, Carthage and Rome were not enemies at all. They signed treaties, they traded, they even fought on the same side. But 2 powers growing in the same sea cannot avoid each other forever. And between them lay a single, fatal prize, the island of Sicily. In 264 before Christ, a local dispute on Sicily dragged both giants into war. It would become the First Punic War, the word Punic coming from the Roman name for the Phoenician people, and it exposed the one great weakness of Rome. Rome was a land power. It had legions that could crush anything that walked, but it had almost no navy. Carthage ruled the waves. On paper, it was no contest. So Rome did something astonishing. When a Carthaginian warship ran aground, the Romans hauled it ashore, took it apart, and used it as a blueprint to build an entire fleet of their own, from nothing in a matter of months. And because their sailors were untrained, they invented a weapon to change the rules. A boarding bridge with a great iron spike on the end, called the corvus, the raven. When a Carthaginian ship came alongside, the Romans would drop the spike, pin the 2 vessels together, and turn a sea battle into a land battle where their legionaries were unbeatable. After 23 brutal years, Carthage was exhausted and bankrupt. It sued for peace, surrendered Sicily, and paid a crushing fine. Rome had won round 1. But out of that defeat rose the family that would nearly destroy Rome forever, the Barcas. Their patriarch, Hannibal Barca, refused to accept that Carthage was finished. He took his army to Spain and began carving out a new empire of silver mines and loyal soldiers, a power base far from the politicians back home. And there is a story, told by the Romans themselves, that before he left, Hamilcar took his 9-year-old son to an altar, made him place his hand on the sacrifice, and swear an oath to be, for as long as he lived, the eternal enemy of Rome. That boy was Hannibal, and he kept his promise. In 218 before Christ, Hannibal launched the Second Punic War, and what he did next remains one of the boldest gambles in military history. Rome expected an attack by sea. Instead, Hannibal marched his army overland, out of Spain, through southern Gaul, and straight at the one barrier everyone believed an army could not cross, the Alps, in autumn, with war elephants. It was a nightmare, freezing storms, landslides, ambushes by mountain tribes, paths so narrow the elephants could barely pass. He lost nearly half his men on those frozen slopes. But when Hannibal came down the far side into Italy, he was behind Rome's defenses in the heart of its homeland, where no enemy was supposed to be. And then he began to win. At the river Trebia, he destroyed a Roman army. At Lake Trasimene, he trapped another in a fog and annihilated it, killing 15,000 men in a few hours. Rome was reeling, and then came the day that still echoes through every military academy on earth. Cannae. In 216 before Christ, Rome raised the largest army it had ever fielded, perhaps 80,000 men, and threw it at Hannibal to end the war once and for all. Hannibal had fewer than 50,000. He arranged his line in a gentle curve, bulging toward the Romans, and let the center slowly give way under their charge. The Romans pushed deeper, smelling victory, packing tighter and tighter. And then Hannibal's cavalry swept around the back, and his veteran troops closed in from both sides, and the curve became a noose. The greatest army Rome had ever assembled was surrounded and butchered in a single afternoon. Tens of thousands died. It remains to this day one of the bloodiest days of battle in all of human history. Hannibal was at the gates. Rome should have fallen. But here is the strange, decisive truth. Hannibal could win battles, but he couldn't take the city itself. Rome had walls he could not breach, and a stubbornness that would not break. It simply refused to surrender. Year after year, Hannibal roamed Italy, undefeated in the field, slowly running out of men and supplies, while Rome learned to avoid him and strike everywhere else. And the man who finally found the answer was a young Roman general named Scipio. He did not chase Hannibal around Italy. Instead, he took the war to Carthage itself, landing an army in North Africa and threatening the city directly. It worked. Carthage, in a panic, recalled Hannibal home from Italy after 15 years away. And in 202 before Christ, the two greatest commanders of the age finally faced each other at a place called Zama. This time, Scipio had learned every lesson Hannibal had taught the world. He neutralized the elephants, outmaneuvered the master, and won. Hannibal, the man who had terrified Rome for nearly 2 decades, was finally beaten. Carthage surrendered again. It lost its fleet, its empire in Spain, almost everything. It became a shadow, forbidden to wage war without Rome's permission. By any reasonable measure, the rivalry was over. Carthage was no longer a threat. And yet, here is the part that should chill anyone who studies how empires think. Carthage, stripped of its army and its territory, did the only thing it had left. It went back to trade, and within 50 years it was rich again, not powerful, not dangerous, just prosperous. And to a certain kind of Roman, that prosperity was unbearable. His name was Cato the Elder, a senator who had visited Carthage and come home gripped by fear and hatred. From then on, it is said, he ended every single speech he ever gave on any subject at all with the same 6 words: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. Not contained, not weakened, destroyed. And eventually, Rome listened. In 149 before Christ, on a flimsy pretext, Rome demanded the impossible. It ordered the Carthaginians to abandon their city by the sea and move inland, to give up the harbor that was their entire identity. When Carthage refused, Rome had the war it wanted. The Third Punic War was not really a war at all. It was an execution. For 3 years, the Carthaginians held out behind their great walls with a courage that astonished even their enemies. Citizens with no military training fought from rooftops. Women cut off their hair to be twisted into ropes for the catapults, but it could not last. The Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the Scipio who had beaten Hannibal, broke through at last. And then came the 6 days. 6 days of fighting through the streets, house by house, floor by floor, as the city burned around them. When it was over, the survivors, perhaps 50,000 people, the last of a civilization that had lasted 7 centuries, were sold into slavery. The buildings were pulled down, and Rome made certain that Carthage would never rise again. You have probably heard the famous story that the Romans sowed the ground with salt so that nothing would ever grow there. Historians now doubt that detail actually happened, but the truth is almost more striking, because Rome did not need salt. It erased Carthage in a far more complete way. It destroyed the buildings, scattered the people, and let the city's vast written records, its history, its literature, its accounts of itself, simply vanish. Of all the books of Carthage, the Romans bothered to preserve only one, a practical treatise on farming by a writer named Mago, because it was useful to them. Everything else, the poetry, the chronicles, the voice of an entire people telling its own story, was lost forever. And that is why, when we look at Carthage today, we are almost always looking through Roman eyes. Hannibal comes down to us as a kind of monster from a nightmare, the boogeyman Roman parents used to frighten their children. The Carthaginians are remembered as cruel, treacherous, alien. But every word of that portrait was painted by the side that wanted them gone. We will never fully hear how the Carthaginians saw themselves, because the only people allowed to write the ending were the ones who lit the fire. There is a final irony. About a century after they destroyed it, the Romans rebuilt a new city on the very same spot, a Roman Carthage, which grew to become one of the greatest cities of the entire Roman Empire. The place could not be kept dead, but the original, the Phoenician city of Elissa and Hamilcar and Hannibal, was gone for good. So think back to Scipio Aemilianus, weeping on that hill as the smoke rose. He was right. Rome did fall in the end, just as Carthage had. Every empire does. The story of Carthage is not only the story of a vanished city. It is a warning written in ash that history is told by the victors, that the loudest voice is not always the truest one, and that an entire world can be erased so thoroughly that we are left straining to hear even its faintest echo. If this brought a lost civilization back to life for you, take a moment to subscribe so we can keep rescuing these forgotten worlds together. And I would love to hear what you think. Do you believe the stories of Carthage's cruelty, or were they Roman propaganda? Was Hannibal the greatest general who ever lived? Or did his failure to take Rome prove otherwise? And which lost civilization should we bring back next? Tell me in the comments. I will see you in the next era.